This was a tribe completely cut off from the outside, where they weren't interested. They loved their own world. They had absolutely encyclopedic knowledge of the plants and the animals, everything. And we went into the Red Sea Hills. As I said, there were several journalists with us from Newsweek. We had a local guide and he lost the way.
Today I have the absolute privilege of interviewing one of the most extraordinary explorers, Michael Asher. From the SAS to the sands of the Sahara, his life has been a testament to courage, curiosity and a deep connection with the natural world. I think we should just begin. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to meet you, Michael. So you're here in the UAE, you're attending this wonderful festival for reading for children, but I would love to start with, what drew you in the first place to being in the desert? You're back in the desert here with the UAE.
Yes.
What was it that drew you to it in the first place?
I went out to Sudan. This is 1979, so it's a long time ago. I went to Sudan as a volunteer teacher, and I was sent to a school which was on the very edge of the Sahara, in the Nile Valley. And the school itself was actually in the desert, just outside the town. So every day I walked to school, and the desert just stretched away, in front of me, and it was absolutely pristine. It seemed this magical, enchanted place, because no motor cars, no machines of any kind, no electricity lines, nothing, just this pristine nature. And it really attracted me. And I thought, I could set off from here in a straight line. I could walk for day after day, week after week, month after month, thousands and thousands of kilometers. I'd never cross a road, never cross a river, never find a city until I came to the Atlantic Ocean. Wow. And that was about 7,000 kilometers away. So it was like standing on the shore of this huge ocean of sand and stone and rock, and think, this was a place where modernity hadn't penetrated. It was this magical land. And I think that's what appealed to me about it.
Absolutely. Well, I can understand why. It's so different from concrete jungles, the absolute opposite. Nothing on the horizon whatsoever. So tell us a little bit about, what you did next and what you decided why you decided to do some of your adventures.
It really started then, because one day I was walking to school and I saw in the distance what looked like this sort of spider with many legs. And I stood there and it came slowly towards me, and I realized it was a herd of camels, over 100 camels, and they were being driven by this sort of gruff looking men, cracking whip. They were riding camels, cracking whips and driving these camels. So I had a bit of Arabic by then. I went up and spoke to them. I said, well, where are you going? And they said, well, we're taking these camels to Egypt. And they'd come from Darfur. I said, well, Egypt's actually a very long way. And they said, yeah, this is a caravan route. It's called a Darb al-Arba'in, which means, as you know, it means the 40 days road. And I discovered this ancient caravan route was still being used. This is in 1979, 1980. And it was being used every day by nomads taking their camels for sale in Egypt. They went all the way to Cairo camel market, thousands of miles on the Hood. So from that point, I realized people actually lived in the desert, that I'd seen as this pristine wilderness, but I didn't imagine people still actually lived there. And I found out that they did. They lived exactly as they'd lived for thousands of years, living in tents, moving around putting all their belongings on camels, moving from place to place. And so I eventually went to live with these people. This was several years later. And these were people who'd never been in a city, never seen a television, never been in a motor car. They had absolutely no concept of a nation state. I remember I had a Sudanese £10 note in my hand, and one of them said to me, who is this man on the money? And I said, well, it's the president. He said, what do you mean the president? I said, the president of Sudan. You're Sudanese, aren't you? We're not Sudanese, we're Arabs. Sudanese are the people who live in the villages,
Wow,
so they had just no concept, that they lived in this nation state with borders and government and all that kind of thing.
What a beautiful place to be in, something where in another reality to what we exist in now. I can see why that would have been so attractive to go and learn more about how these people live.
Yeah.
What do you think that, you know, you've just said that you went and you spent several years.
Yeah, I spent 3 years living with them, with this particular tribe, the Kababish. Was, as I said, this was a tribe that at that time anyway, they were completely cut off from the outside. Well, they weren't interested, and they didn't. They loved their own world, and they knew everything about. They had absolutely encyclopedic knowledge of the plants and the animals, everything. But they knew nothing about the world outside of that, you know.
It's a slightly more important knowledge, isn't it? Having an encyclopedic knowledge about nature.
That's what they needed, you know, for their lives, you know. So.
And that, I mean, I think that leads me to my question that, you know, what do you think that the desert teaches you about life that modernity or cities, for example, can't?
Well, I mean, it teaches you many things, but I think humility is one thing, because these people, when I'd lived with them for a while, I realized that they didn't have this attitude that they could control things, you know, could control nature. You know, they were adaptable, they were extremely resilient, because, you know, the pattern of rainfall, which they depended on for their animals, you know, because the grass grew in accordance to the rain. And it was always different every year. So they always had to change a little bit where they were going, that kind of thing. You know, maybe some years the rain would be quite poor, so they'd have to move quite a long distance somewhere else where it had rain. And they were very resilient and very, you know, they were modest, you know what I mean? They didn't think, they weren't in control. We don't control. We just adapt to what happens, you know, and I admired that. So it was a good lesson, really.
Absolutely, and if only people could think that way today. There's so much now. I mean, talks, for example, of, you know, trying to camouflage the sun so that, you know.
Well, exactly.
You know, like now we actually
the rain, that kind of thing.
We need to learn to live with nature, not try and change nature.
Exactly. Yeah.
But unfortunately, that takes a huge step. When I say backwards, probably forwards, you know, to go back to the way
I think so.
People used to think.
Because, you know, their lives were free also, because everything they had came to them from the desert. You know, we tend to think of the desert as being this wasteland, but actually there was great abundance in the desert for them, because rain always falls in the desert somewhere, you know, and the grass grows, as I said, even in the empty quarter here. I mean, it's very, very lush. After the rains, you know, we call it the empty quarter, but actually it's not empty. And nomads lived there for thousands of years, you know. And that grass is free, and their camels eat the grass, produce the camel's milk, which is the staple of their diet. And it's very, very nutritious, you know. So, you know, their lives are free in that sense. I mean, they did go to markets sometimes, and, you know, they bought things they needed, like cooking pots or knives or things like that, you know, but they'd never use money between themselves.
Fantastic. I wish we could go back to
that.
Sounds heavenly. But what's, so sorry for the basic question.
No, not at all.
But what did they hunt? What did they eat? What, you know, you've just said camel's milk, but obviously there would be
camel's milk was the staple. They also, they didn't grow grain themselves. They would trade, they would go to a market, sell their goats and sheep, sometimes a camel, and with that money they would buy grain, sorghum grain, you know, and they would take that back into the desert, and they made a kind of polenta, it's called acida, and that was, again, they would serve that with camel's milk, and that was what they had to eat every day. They also had meat. They would hunt gazelle. But again, their hunting was very, I mean, they had tremendous respect for nature. They would never wipe out a herd of gazelle, something like that, you know. They'd just shoot one that they needed to eat that day, whatever, you know, and it certainly wasn't every day. But they could also slaughter, you know, goats or sheep for meat as well, you know. So they had meat. They didn't eat it every day, or maybe once a week, something like that, you know. But
so many lessons to be learned.
Yeah.
And it sounds like they were partly vegetarian. Well, with the polenta, not the shooting of animals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. As I said, I mean, meat wasn't something they ate every day. It would be a special occasion.
I mean, we often say this at the Ethicalist, that we don't tell people to stop eating meat, but because of its impact on the environment now, to treat it like it used to be treated as a luxury, which was something that it was. When you have to go out and you have to find the animal and you have to kill it and you have to skin it and etc., that you treat it as a luxury.
Absolutely.
Now we just go to a supermarket and it doesn't look like an animal. So can you also, when you spent time in Darfur, which is where you first started writing, I believe.
It is, yeah.
Your first book.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about that? And I really would love to hear the story about the cow.
Yeah. After my very first journey with Nomads, this is before I went to live full time with them. I went to live in Janaina. I was teaching there actually for 2 years. And I bought my own camels and kept them. I lived in a mud hut in a big yard, it's called a hosh, And the owner of the house actually kept cows in the yard. And I started writing my first book, which is called In Search of the 40 Days Road, which is about this ancient caravan route. And I wrote on a mechanical typewriter, which I borrowed from the school. The house had no electricity, anything like that. We had oil lamps and stuff. Anyway, I wrote the first 15 pages. I wanted to be a writer all my life. Actually, I wrote a book when I was 13. It didn't get published, but I did send it to a publisher. But anyway, so that was my ambition. And this was my first book. And I wrote the first 15 pages. I came back one day and I found a cow actually in the house eating the manuscript. And
heartbreaking.
It was actually in her mouth, and I sort of pulled it out of her mouth, but of course most of it was just destroyed anyway. So
bless you.
So I had to start again, so that was the first few pages of my first book, which eventually did get published.
Excellent. So. Glad to hear it. You managed to rewrite it.
Yeah, I did.
Didn't ask her to regurgitate it. But I mean, obviously, writing on one of these old typewriters is nothing like, now if you lose 15 pages, you just press print again, then it's the odd, and also the memory of how you've written it and how long you've spent.
I just couldn't remember. I knew I could never get it exactly as it was.
And you just had to. And what were you doing at that time there? You were.
I was teaching in a school. I lived in this town called Janaina, which is right on the Chad border. It's in Darfur, and had no electricity in the town. There was no running water, no plumbing. All the water came from a well, and there were no asphalt road. There were a few cars, but very, very few. No high rise, nothing like that.
Wonderful.
And every day I'd see these camel caravans coming into the town, and there'd be beautiful young Arab girls riding the camels, and men riding the horses with spears and things like that. And it was just, I thought, where am I? This is magical. And I spent, because the school didn't work in the afternoon, I spent all the afternoons in the market talking to these people who came into the market, to the shopkeepers, and they were very, very friendly people. The Sudanese are really friendly. And that's how I learned Arabic. I never had even an hour's tuition. I just learned from talking to these people for hours every day and finding out about their lives.
Who needs to go to school?
Exactly.
And you can just communicate with people.
Yeah, exactly.
So, just to take a step back, how did you grow up? What was there an influence in your life when you were young that led you to do something so different in that period of time? Adventuring and exploring is quite a thing now, but it certainly wasn't in the 1970s.
Yeah, not really at all. I come from a small town in Lincolnshire. It's a very kind of conservative place. I grew up there. There was nothing. My father had been in the military, in the army, but that was during the Second World War, So I always had this yearning for adventure. And since we're here at the Really for Pleasure conference, I should say that desire came from books, that I used to go to the local library, get the books out, and the kids' adventure books, about exotic places and things. And I thought, I'd really like to do that, So I think that was the influence, really. And then on leaving school, I joined the army and served in special forces, I think you mentioned. And to get in the SAS regiment, you have to pass a very, very tough selection test, which is nothing to do with motor vehicles, contrary to popular believe. It's to do with walking, and you have to carry very heavy weights in the mountains, arduous, adverse conditions, through the snow and the rain and the fog and all this on your own at night. You've got to do your own navigating.
A lot harder than Duke of Edinburgh by the sounds of
Yeah.
things. This is the SAS after all.
Yeah. And you do that day after day. It's not just once, and the distances get longer as you're getting more tired. So I mean, it's the toughest thing I've ever done.
Well, I think it's one of the toughest things one can do.
Well, that's what they say.
The SAS, yes.
Yeah. And you get a certain time. You've got to be at a certain place, a certain time. You've got to find your way there with the map. If you're not there at that time, you fail. There's no, the chopper's gone, as they say.
Right.
So, and only 1 in 10 people get through. It's 10% pass rate. So you start with 120, 12 of those get through.
Gosh.
And when you're one of those 12, you really feel, wow, I really did something here. You feel proud of yourself,
sense of
obviously.
achievement.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, and they give you this sand-coloured beret with the wing dagger, and it says "Who dares wins." And they tell you, okay, now you're SAS, you can do anything. So I mean, it's an exaggeration, of course, but you sort of believe it because you just did this, tremendous thing. And I think that stood me in very good stead for what I did.
That was leading me to my question.
Yeah.
Like, surely a lot of the skills that you learnt when you were in the SAS must have transferred to you being able to live for 3 years with a nomadic tribe.
Well, yeah, in the sense that you learn to sleep anywhere under any conditions, and to walk everywhere, under hard conditions, and to be on your own and to navigate on your own. But I think more than the skills, it was that confidence that you can do anything. As I say, it's a bit of an exaggeration, of course, you can't, but you have this feeling, well, I can do this.
Yes.
So, for example, I can tell you the story when my first camel ride, for example. When I decided to go and travel with these nomads, I'd never been on a camel before. I didn't know anything about camels, didn't know how to saddle a camel or make the camel kneel, nothing. I just bought a camel in the marketplace with the saddle and things, and I set off thinking, I can do this.
Look, I'm the SAS, I can do this.
I'm a SAS, I can do this. But of course, hubris is followed by nemesis. So 3 days into that journey, I stopped under this thorn tree, and I was about to set off again with the camels. I knew nothing about camels at all. And the camel suddenly snatched the head rope out of my hand, turned round and ran off, galloped off the way we'd just come. And this is in the desert, And everything I had was on the camel, my water, my passport, my money, everything, And it suddenly disappeared over a sandhill. And I thought, this is my first journey by camel. It's going to be my last, because here I'm in the middle of the desert. My camel's run off with everything I've got. Anyway, I got to the top of this hill. I saw the camel down below. It stopped to graze in the dune grass. And I also saw there were 2 men coming towards me on camels, nomads, And this is my very first journey. And so I jumped up and down, said, the camel, and they understood. And they circled around the camel very expertly and grabbed hold of his nostrils, which I learned is how you control a camel. And I ran down to meet them. I said, I can't understand what happened. And the camel just ran off for no reason. They said, oh, when did you last feed him? I said, I haven't fed him, actually. I said, I thought camels could go a long time without food. He said, no, camels can go a long time without water, but they need to eat every day, just like you and me, So I felt really embarrassed. And actually, I sort of treated the camel like a motorbike or something, And so that was my first big lesson.
Really. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did they teach you a little bit more with the time that they spent with you then, or?
Well, yeah, they told me that I needed to buy grain from the villages, because camels are in Sudan. They're trained to eat grain, sorghum grain, and you needed to give them at least 2 kilos every day, as well as the grass that they're.
Gosh.
Because they eat a lot, So, so it was a big lesson for me.
Absolutely, I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
Well, you were lucky that they were there. I mean, that was.
Yeah, I really was actually.
Very
they saved my life, really.
So, I mean, we've talking about food, and this is a terrible segue, but I know that you witnessed a famine at some points,
Yeah.
and that you were asked in the 1980s by the United Nations to take a camel caravan of aid to. Could you elaborate on exactly where it was?
This is. I went back to Khartoum. Had been living with the Nomads, and I got a message. I was talking to a journalist, and I got a message from the UNICEF representative. I went to see him. He said, "Can you organise this camel caravan in eastern Sudan?" This is the opposite side of Sudan from where I've been living, from Darfur, the Red Sea Hills, and there are nomads living there called the Beja. They don't speak Arabic as their mother tongue. They're famous for having these big plumes of hair. The British call them the fuzzy wuzzies, you know.
Okay.
And there were, as you said, there was a tremendous famine and, drought going on at that time. And so they said, would you organise this caravan? You take aid, food, supplies, take a medical team, nutritionists, we had a doctor as well with us, and that there are these people cut off in the hills. And you can take the aid to them because four-wheel drive vehicles couldn't get in there, you know. So, and there were journalists with us as well. It was a bit of a publicity stunt for UNICEF as well. I mean, it was a genuine aid mission, but you know, as you know, UNICEF get their funds from the public, so you know it's good if they can advertise these kind of things.
Absolutely,
you know?
Of course.
So, and on that journey, UNICEF sent along their media representative, media officer, Marianetta Peru, who, and that's how we got to know each other.
Marianetta then became your wife.
She did, yeah.
Oh,
and we made the first recorded crossing of the Sahara Desert together.
That's what I wanted to ask. I didn't realise that you met on this particular aid
I did,
expedition.
on a camel expedition.
Oh, but two kindred spirits, both on with your love of adventure and humanitarianism and nature. So you then, I believe, so this was a separate occasion then, of course, where you did the 4,500.
Oh, that was a quite separate thing. This
Yes.
aid expedition, it only lasted a week, 10 days, something like that. And we went into the Red Sea Hills. As I said, there were several journalists with us from Newsweek, and we got lost.
Yes.
We had a local guide, and he lost the way. And it's very mountainous there. It's not like the open desert, you know. And
Oh dear.
yeah, he got lost.
With all these international journalists.
Yeah, exactly. And one of them actually freaked out, you know, and said, we're all going to die, you're all going to die, you know. And my Antonietta, who was with us, said, look, I think I saw, because we had no water, we'd run out of water, that was the problem.
Gosh.
And she said, I think I saw a water pool. And nobody else had seen it. I didn't see it either. So we left the other people there with the camels. It was, you know, getting dark. And we went off together, just the two of us, to find this pool that she'd seen. And it was actually there. It was very muddy water, but it actually was there, you know.
Wow.
And that was when we got to know each other, sort of thing, on that.
And this walk to find water.
Yeah.
And it was muddy water. Did you have means of?
Oh, we actually had water filters.
Okay, of course. So, makes sense.
Yeah.
You would need them, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. What a romantic way to get together.
Yeah, it's true.
And you're still together now, and
We
you
are.
have children.
Yes. Yeah, we do.
That's
two children.
Beautiful love story. It's another one of your books. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So anyway, I didn't go back to as I said, I'd been living with the Nomads before that. And after meeting Marianetta, I didn't go back to them, not immediately anyway. And I told her, this is a few weeks later, that I'd always had this plan at the back of my mind to cross the entire Sahara. And this goes back to what I was saying about when I first saw it. I had this idea, this great ocean of sand and rock, you know, as far as the Atlantic Ocean. And I knew it hadn't actually been done. At least, let me put it like this. I'm sure many indigenous people had done it,
Sure.
but there was no recorded crossing of the Sahara from west to east. And I told her, look, I've got this plan, you know, to cross the Sahara all the way from, you know, west to east. And she said, I want to go with you.
Amazing.
So she left her job with UNICEF, this, you know, well-paid job. She gave that up to cross the Sahara. And we got married in London, and the next day we went out to Mauritania because we decided to do it from the Atlantic to the Nile rather than the other way round. And that was our honeymoon.
It's not quite the Maldives.
No, exactly. Yeah.
But what an experience.
Yeah, and it took, well, we had 3 months in Mauritania, staying in a small oasis in a one-roomed house with no electricity, training. Because Marintinietta, although she spoke fluent Arabic, she studied Arabic, she didn't know much about camels. I mean, she'd just done the UNICEF expedition, that's all. So we had 3 months training, and then we started on the crossing of the Sahara. And it took 9 months, 271 days, from there to the Nile. And we had many adventures on that.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Do you want to share any?
Well, for example, when we got to Chad, I should say that for about 2/3 of the way we had local guides with us.
Okay.
But the last, because I travelled in the eastern part of the Sahara with the Nomads a lot, we didn't have there was just the two of us then. And we were going through eastern Chad. And so we talked to some nomads and said, you've got to be careful here because there's hyenas and they will carry away children, you know. So anyway, one night we just made camp. It was dark and we heard this, like this. And Martina said, what's that? I said, well, I think it's a goat. He said, that's not a goat. And this huge hyena sort of appeared out of the dusk and started circling around the camp. And he started making towards us, you know, and we didn't have any firearms, anything like that, but I just had an emergency flare, which is designed for boats. It shoots a red flare, you know, and of course it was right at the bottom of the saddlebag. And so I started digging for it, and she said, Mike, he's coming, he's coming. And I was digging for this flare, you know, he's coming, he's coming. I eventually found it, and I pointed it, you know, in general direction of the hyena, and I pulled the trigger. It just clicked, you know. He's coming, Mike, he's coming. I pulled him and click, you know. He's coming, he's coming. Put the third time, click, and there was, you know, an explosion. I mean, I didn't actually shoot at the hyena, you know. This explosion of crimson light. And when our eyes adjusted, he just disappeared, you know.
I'm not surprised. Yeah. Probably got quite alarmed.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, I can imagine the panic. It's coming. Yeah. Where is it? Oh, no, it's not working. So
that was one of the experiences we had.
It sounds fantastic. It's lifelong memories.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of people are now interested in exploring and adventures. Yeah. You know, how would you... What would you say to people now to try and leave a lesser footprint? I mean, we've seen people, for example, who go to Mount Everest, and we've all seen pictures of Mount Everest strewn with litter and you know, discarded belongings, etc. And it would be such a shame to see things like that happening to, you know, remote parts of the world. What would your advice be?
Well, as far as the desert goes, what I would say is go on foot. Don't go in a car. So people associate the desert, you know, with dune bashing, that kind of thing. And I mean, particularly here, the desert has actually been ruined by that, you know, and you can see car tracks everywhere. And you can hardly take a photograph of the desert without seeing those tracks, you know. And the dunes actually are permanently damaged by that. I mean, I've done some research on it. And although the surface may be restored, the internal structure of the sand particles is permanently changed, apparently, you know, so it does have lasting damage, you know. That's not true in the Dubai Desert Conservation Reserve, where I'm working now. The dunes have been preserved there, but that's one of the few places where they're still pristine. You know,
gosh, I had no idea.
Yeah, apparently, you know. So
I mean, you know, I literally went out to a barbecue there in the desert a few weeks ago. I didn't drive. We parked the cars on the road and then walked in. Yeah. But the amount of, you know, these buggies and the motorbikes, and it was, you know, and I was with, you know, my 2 young children, and I was fearful. I'm in the desert and I'm fearful that they're going to get knocked over. You know, which is really a shame.
Really.
And then not only that, I was so so astonished by how much litter there was, and we went
that's the
litter
other
picking,
thing,
and all three of us picked up, in just 5 minutes, all these bags, and you just think it's such a shame with somewhere that's so beautiful. Why go and enjoy it and not take your belongings home with you? It's just really needing to change that disposable mentality that
I agree.
that a lot of people have.
So, I'd really like to see much more, people going by camel, because, it's so peaceful and you can really enjoy, in a car, you just see it up through the window and you experience it almost like watching a TV, but if you travel on foot, you're actually there touching Mother Earth, and, everything, the heat and the wind and everything, you're actually feeling that, and so, and you can do it. As I said, my wife and I crossed the world's biggest desert with camels. We never went in a car, at all. So, it's not that difficult. It's just getting away from this automotive mentality sort of thing, which has become a sort of a feature of this age, really, and going back to just doing things on foot. And, for me, it's much more enjoyable.
Of course.
And again, this comes back to the Nomads' idea of their humility, that in a way, when you're in a car, you're sort of controlling and dominating the landscape. When you're traveling by camel, you're adapting to the landscape, and you're not destroying it either, so.
Right, so it makes perfect sense. I know that we may be running out of time, so I just have one more question. You've mentioned one of the threats that face some of the world's deserts now, which is obviously this obsession with automobiles and that being the way of travelling around deserts. How do you feel, as somebody who's spent so much time traversing deserts, about the arid, the way climate change is affecting these areas now? Do you feel, what do you think the threats are to desert areas?
Well, it is a serious threat, and really, I think the fighting in Darfur, which started years ago, and now in the Sahel in North Africa, it was all started because of climate change, because the nomads started moving south, and of course, eventually they got into the cultivated land, so they came in conflict with the farmers, and that's what really started the conflict, and then, various political elements got into it, but it really started through climate change. So it is very serious, I think. It has a very serious effect on those people.
And a very serious effect on, everywhere.
Yeah, really.
There's nowhere that remains untouched.
Absolutely.
The amount of natural disasters, etc., that we're witnessing on an unprecedented scale.
Yes,
so, but particularly in remote areas where there's already a lack of access to water.
That's it.
Seems. And you mentioned that you're working with Dubai Conservation in the desert here.
Well, I've been working in Dubai Desert Conservation Reserve, which, as you know, is the only nature reserve in Dubai. And there are Arabian oryx there, about 300 head, I think. And the oryx went extinct in 1972 in the wild, and that has been restored. I think there are about 10,000 in all of Arabia, but there are about 300 in the DDCR, and we've got gazelles as well, 2 different kinds, and other small animals. And the amazing thing is, when you go there, you can see how the desert was sort of meant to be, because elsewhere it's been overgrazed, ruined by dune bashing and things. But it's actually very green, because all the plants that should have grown there actually do grow there now, like firebush. Excuse me. Firebush is merach in Arabic. They used to light fires. We actually teach the kids to light fires using firebush. Although the firewood we bring from outside, because we don't cut any trees or anything like that.
Sure.
So. We've been working there, and I'm working with San Sherpa, Rob Nicholas. I don't know if you know him.
Yes.
Yes. And we developed this course. It's called Nomad Ways. So we're teaching the skills and values of nomads. So skills, because I think, skills on their own, we tend to think of cultures as being skill sets, but actually the most important thing about a culture is its values, you know, the story it has about why we're here and those kind of things. So it's very important to learn both of those. So how do you teach values? Well, the answer is through stories, which is really why I'm here at the conference. So each one of our lessons, it might be fire lighting, it might be animal tracks, it might be how to ride a camel, all those things. But each lesson starts with a story, and the story, you know, transmits values. And of course, that's the way the nomads transmitted values, because they didn't read or write, but they told stories for hours and hours. They'd sit around it, and they loved it. You know, and the Arabic language is so rich, you know. And they had poetry as well, which we also, and we do storytelling with the kids, and we do oral poetry as well, which of course the nomads did.
Oh,
so
wonderful.
yeah.
Oh, that's fabulous that you have this initiative with Sand Sherpa.
Yeah.
I will certainly be looking more into that. I didn't realise that this was happening, so that's wonderful. And I'm sure you're the perfect person for it, with all the stories that you have to share.
Well, thank you very much. But I'd like to give Rob his due, Rob Nicholas, because it was his idea, and then he contacted me, and I actually wrote the course. But he had the idea
the idea to do it. It's a fabulous idea. It's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to myself and to the listeners and readers of The Ethicalist. It's fascinating talking to you. I could ask you so many more questions, but
thank you very much.
But thank you, and enjoy the rest of your stay in the UAE.
Thanks.
Thank you.